My name is Courtney, and I spent 8 months pouring my heart, my time, and every bit of my skill into sewing my sister's wedding dress. I stitched late into the night, my fingers raw and my eyes tired, all because I believed it mattered, all because I thought that maybe, just maybe, this act of love would bring me closer to her. But when the invitations went out, mine never came. It still feels like a bruise when I think about it. I can picture myself sitting at the kitchen table, carefully folding lace over satin, imagining the look on her face when she walked down the aisle. For months, my world revolved around that gown, picking the fabric, sketching the design, hand-sewing the delicate beading. It wasn't just a dress. It was a piece of my heart, a quiet attempt to prove to my family that I wasn't invisible. And then the invitations arrived. A glossy white envelope with elegant calligraphy slipped through the mail slot. I remember holding it in my hands, my pulse quickening, because even though I'd been working on the dress for months, part of me still craved the official confirmation. Part of me needed to see my name written there, proof that I belonged. But when I tore it open, the paper inside wasn't for me. It was an invitation for a cousin, addressed to the wrong house by mistake. Mine never came. At first, I tried to tell myself it was an oversight. Maybe she'd hand it to me in person. Maybe it was delayed in the mail. I waited. I watched the days pass, the pile of other relatives' invitations sitting proudly on their fridges or pinned to corkboards, the save the dates filling their calendars. But my mailbox stayed empty. My name was never on the list. That was the moment it truly sank in. I wasn't just left out of the guest list. I was erased. She wanted my hands, my labor, my dedication, but she didn't want me. She wanted the gown, not the sister who made it. The realization burned hotter than any needle prick I'd ever felt. I can still hear her voice the day she first asked me, pretending to be sentimental. "Court, it would mean so much if you made my dress." "It'll be so special. Just between us," I said yes because I wanted that bond. I wanted to believe that after years of being overshadowed, there was finally a place for me in her story. I poured myself into those stitches, dreaming of seeing her light up in something crafted by my hands. And instead, I was left outside the door, not even given a seat in the back row. When I tell people this, they ask me what hurt more, the work wasted or the missing invitation. The truth is, it wasn't either. What cut the deepest was realizing that no matter what I gave, no matter how much love I stitched into that dress, I was never part of the picture. I was useful, but not loved. And that's where my story begins. Not at the sewing machine, not at the moment she twirled in the gown, but at the empty mailbox that told me exactly where I stood in my family's eyes. From the outside, my family looked flawless. Holiday cards featured us lined up in matching sweaters, standing in front of a perfectly decorated tree. At Thanksgiving, neighbors would stop by just to compliment the table spread, remarking how lucky my parents must feel to have such a beautiful family. And in church, we sat side by side in the front pew, smiling as though nothing had ever gone wrong between us. People looked at us and saw harmony. They saw a storybook family, but the truth was written in the cracks that no one else bothered to notice. Behind the closed doors of our home, the smiles slipped quickly, and the hierarchy revealed itself. My sister Madeline, the golden child, always stood in the center of every photograph, her arm around my mother, her grin polished for the camera. I was positioned off to the side, always just slightly out of focus. And that's exactly how it felt to live there. Like I was the extra, the shadow, the afterthought. At family gatherings, relatives praised Madeline endlessly. "She's so stunning," they'd say. "She's going to be such a perfect bride one day." My parents would beam with pride, nodding along as though the words belonged to them too. When the conversation turned to me, it was only ever surface level. If I brought up something I was working on, a dress I'd designed, an award I'd won at school, or the fact that I'd taken on extra work to support myself, it was met with a polite nod and a quick redirection back to Madeline. "That's nice, Courtney. Did you see what Madeline wore last week?" Even the photographs told the story. After gatherings, I'd scroll through the albums my mom proudly posted on Facebook. In nearly every picture, Madeline glowed in the center while I faded into the background. If I smiled too big, my mom would remind me to tone it down. If I looked tired, she would joke loudly that I never knew how to pull myself together the way Madeline did. And yet, when the pictures went online, there were dozens of comments about how beautiful the family was, how lucky my parents were to have two wonderful daughters. No one knew that I was invisible inside those walls. The favoritism wasn't always loud, but it was constant. Madeline was praised for things as small as setting the table or brushing her hair. Meanwhile, I could sew an entire garment by hand, and my parents would barely glance up. They laughed off my frustrations, dismissed my feelings, and told me I was jealous whenever I tried to speak up. The message was clear. Madeline was the star, and I was lucky to orbit her. It's strange how much people believe in a picture. One perfect family photo, one curated holiday post, and the world is convinced. But I lived behind the frame. I knew that the perfect family image everyone admired was nothing but a mask. Behind it was a house where love was rationed, and I was always left hungry. That's the part no one saw, the ugly truth hidden behind pretty smiles. Madeline had always been the one people adored. It wasn't just her looks, though, that was what everyone noticed first. She had the kind of smile that drew people in, the laugh that made others lean closer, the polished way of speaking that convinced you she belonged in the spotlight. At every holiday gathering, every family reunion, she was introduced as the beautiful one, the successful one, the bride-to-be. My parents glowed with pride each time her name was mentioned, as though her charm and her future were proof of their own success. Now, with her wedding approaching, the adoration had only grown louder. Relatives swooned over the engagement photos, friends gushed about the event of the year, and my parents couldn't stop talking about the details of the big day. "Madeline deserves everything to be perfect," my mom repeated like it was scripture, and no matter how many times I heard it, the words landed like a sting. When it came to me, the conversation always fell flat. I had my own quiet talents, but they were never celebrated. I designed clothes, sketched patterns, and had the patience to sew by hand. I'd spent nights teaching myself skills no one else in the family had, but my efforts were met with shrugs. If Madeline wore something I made, suddenly everyone praised how stunning she looked, and my work vanished into the background. It wasn't the dress that mattered. It was that she wore it. I was never seen as the artist. I was only the helper, the extra pair of hands to make her shine brighter. I remember sitting at the dinner table one evening, listening as my parents talked about the wedding as if it belonged to all of them. "Her friends can't wait to be there," my dad said. "She'll look like a princess," my mom added. I quietly cleared the plates, unnoticed, my presence swallowed up by the dream they were spinning around Madeline. It wasn't anger that I felt in those moments. It was a kind of hollow ache, the realization that I could stitch miracles into fabric and still never be worthy of that same pride. Madeline knew it too. She knew she was the golden bride, the one the family worshipped. She wore their favoritism like a crown, and she never hesitated to remind me of my place. "You're so good with your hands, Court," she once said, glancing at the hem I was fixing on her dress. "Not everyone is meant to be in the spotlight. Some people are just better behind the scenes." She smiled when she said it, as if it was a compliment, but it was a sentence, a reminder that my worth in her eyes and in theirs, was to serve her story. The world saw Madeline as the dream bride, the picture of beauty and charm. And in the same breath, they overlooked me, the sister who made it possible, the one who stayed invisible so she could shine. It was her stage, her applause, her crown. Mine was only silence. It had always been this way. From the time we were children, Madeline was the one everyone gravitated toward. At school plays, she was given the lead role while I was placed in the chorus, my face hidden in the second row. Afterward, relatives crowded around her with bouquets and hugs, while I stood quietly to the side, clutching a paper program no one asked me to sign. The message was planted early. Madeline was the star, and I was the shadow. The comparisons weren't just occasional, they were relentless. At family gatherings, people would whisper, "Madeline looks just like her mother, so elegant." Then their eyes would slide to me, and they'd add, "Courtney, well, she has a nice personality." My mom never corrected them. My dad never stepped in. They simply smiled and basked in Madeline's glow, as though being the plain one was all I would ever be. Even when I tried to carve out my own space, it wasn't enough. I fell in love with sewing early, spending hours hunched over fabric, turning scraps into skirts, sketching designs in the margins of my notebooks. I won a local design contest once, presenting a handmade gown I had spent weeks perfecting. When I showed the ribbon to my parents, my mother's response was, "That's nice, dear, but you know fashion isn't a real career." Madeline is focusing on her degree. That's what matters. My ribbon was tucked into a drawer and forgotten. Madeline, on the other hand, didn't need to try as hard. She was praised for the smallest things. If she baked cookies from a box mix, my parents called her talented. If she took a selfie, relatives commented online about her beauty for days. If she got a B on a test, my parents still found a way to celebrate her. But if I pulled straight A's, the reaction was muted. "Good work, Courtney, but maybe don't rub it in around your sister." I can still remember one birthday vividly. I had spent the week making myself a dress to wear, one I was proud of, lavender fabric with lace I had saved up to buy. When I came downstairs, my mother frowned slightly. "Courtney, that looks homemade." Then Madeline walked in, wearing a store-bought dress. The room erupted in praise. "Madeline, you look gorgeous." My dress suddenly felt like rags, and all I wanted was to melt into the floor. It was never about who I was. It was always about who I wasn't. I wasn't Madeline. I wasn't the golden child, the beautiful bride-to-be, the one who made everyone proud just by existing. I was the comparison point, the lesson in contrast. Over the years, those small dismissals stacked up until they formed a wall between me and my family. A wall built from nicknames like the plain one, from shrugged-off achievements, from every time my talents were brushed aside as just hobbies. I learned to stop expecting applause. I learned that, in their eyes, no matter what I did, I would never shine as brightly as Madeline. I remember the night she asked me. Madeline stood in the kitchen, her diamond ring catching the light as she twirled it proudly, her voice bubbling with excitement about the wedding. Everyone was listening, everyone was smiling, and for once her eyes landed on me. "Courtney," she said, her tone soft, almost pleading, "I need you to do something for me. I want you to make my wedding dress." The room went quiet for a second, and then my mother gasped as though Madeline had just offered me a royal commission. "That would be so special," she cooed, clasping her hands together. "Imagine, the two of you working together on something so important." My father nodded, already picturing how sentimental the story would sound to friends and neighbors. And me? My heart thudded in my chest. For years my sewing had been brushed aside as Courtney's little hobby. But now, suddenly, Madeline wasn't dismissing it. She was asking for it. She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel like a secret between us. "It would mean the world to me if you did this. Nobody else could. You'd make it perfect." I should have hesitated. I should have asked myself why she wanted me, why now, why this. But instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that maybe this was my chance to finally step out of the shadow, to finally be part of the picture instead of pushed aside. Maybe if I poured myself into this dress, if I gave her everything I had, it would be more than just fabric and thread. It would be proof that I mattered to her. I agreed right there, my voice steady, though my hands shook. "Okay," I said, "I'll do it." The words left my mouth before I even had time to think them through, and the relief on her face was immediate. She hugged me quickly, the way she always did when she wanted something, and whispered, "You're the best." That night, I pulled out my sketchbook. I traced ideas in the margins of old pages, flipping through fabric swatches I had collected, imagining what she might want. Lace with delicate beading? Satin that shimmered under soft light? I let myself believe this wasn't just another request, another task that would be forgotten once it was finished. This was my chance to connect with her, to create something lasting between us. As the days turned into weeks, I began to see the outlines of the gown in my mind. A masterpiece of elegance, a dress worthy of the golden bride. Each stitch would hold hours of work, but also years of longing. Longing to be seen, to be appreciated, to be part of something more than the background. I didn't realize it at the time, but by agreeing, I wasn't just sewing a wedding dress. I was stitching together every ounce of hope I had left that my sister and I could finally be more than rivals in a house that only had room for one favorite. I thought this promise might change everything. The first night I sat down with the sketchbook, I told myself this would be different. This wasn't just another dress. This was the dress, the one people would remember, the one my sister would cherish, the one that might finally make me feel like I mattered. I drew for hours, flipping through page after page until the sun started to rise. The outlines shifted from rough doodles to something real, a gown with layers of satin, lace appliques along the hem, and beadwork so delicate it would shimmer like stars. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm, work during the day, sewing at night. My tiny desk became buried in fabric swatches, spools of thread, and hand-drawn measurements. I pricked my fingers so many times I lost count, tiny dots of blood-staining practice fabric that I quickly discarded. But I didn't care. Every stitch felt like proof of something. Proof that I could create beauty. Proof that I could give my sister the dress of her dreams. Proof that my talent wasn't just a hobby. Madeline came over for fittings, always sweeping into the room like royalty. She'd glance in the mirror, smile and twirl, her voice floating. "It's coming together so perfectly." She never said thank you, but I convinced myself her smile was enough. I told myself this was progress, that maybe she really did see me differently now. I let myself believe that the late nights and sore hands would finally be worth it. Month after month, I stitched. When others were out at parties or dinners, I sat under the warm glow of a desk lamp, beads rolling across the table, lace spread out like snow. My back ached, my eyes burned, but when I stepped back and looked at the work, I felt something close to pride. I wasn't just making a dress. I was making history for our family, a gown that would stand in photographs for generations. Sometimes I imagined the moment of the wedding, the guests turning to see her walk down the aisle, their eyes widening at the detail, the beauty. I imagined my parents whispering, "Courtney made that." I imagined for once not being the shadow, but the one who quietly made something unforgettable. By the 7th month, the gown was nearly complete. The beadwork caught the light just right. The lace hugged her frame like it had been made for her, which it had. I added finishing touches by hand, embroidery that no machine could replicate. When she tried it on for the final fitting, she gasped. "It's perfect," she whispered, her reflection glowing in the mirror. For a flicker of a moment, I thought I saw pride in her eyes. Not just for the dress, but for me. 8 months. That's how long I poured myself into that gown. 8 months of sacrifice, hope, and quiet longing. Every stitch was a piece of me. I didn't know then that the dress would walk down the aisle without me, that the seat I imagined in the church was never meant for me at all. The day of the final fitting felt like the end of a marathon. 8 months of work had led to this moment, and my hands trembled as I laid the gown carefully across the dress form. The satin gleamed under the light, the lace I had stitched by hand shimmered with quiet elegance, and the beadwork sparkled like tiny constellations. It wasn't just a dress anymore. It was a living thing, breathing with every detail I had poured into it. Madeline arrived late, as she often did, breezing in with her phone still in her hand, barely glancing at me before tossing her bag onto the chair. "So, is it ready?" she asked casually, as though I hadn't spent countless nights bleeding into fabric and pushing through exhaustion. I swallowed the sting and nodded. "It's ready." I helped her slip into the gown, adjusting the delicate buttons along the back, smoothing the fabric so it fell exactly as I had envisioned. My fingers were steady, but my heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just about how she looked. It was about me too. Whether I would finally be seen, whether this masterpiece would prove I wasn't just the plain sister, the helper in the shadows. When she turned toward the mirror, the room went still. For the first time in months, Madeline stopped talking. Her reflection stared back at her, draped in the gown that had consumed almost a year of my life. The lace hugged her shape perfectly. The beadwork caught the light with every movement, and the train pooled behind her like a river of silk. Slowly, a smile spread across her face, wide, genuine, almost childlike. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice low and almost reverent. Then she said it again, louder this time, her eyes glittering. "Courtney, it's perfect." The words sank into me like water after a drought. Perfect. She had never said that about anything I'd made before. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Pride. Not just in the dress, but in myself. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe I finally mattered, not just as the girl who sat quietly while others shined, but as the one who created something unforgettable. Madeline twirled in front of the mirror, watching the fabric move as though it was part of her. "I knew you could do it," she said, her tone triumphant, as if my work confirmed her own brilliance. But I didn't care in that instant. I clung to her earlier words, the rare acknowledgement that what I had made was flawless. As she posed, snapping pictures to send to her friends, I stood off to the side, staring at the gown I had birthed from sketches and scraps. For the first time, I felt a sliver of hope. Maybe this dress would be more than fabric. Maybe it would be a bridge. Maybe, finally, I would not be forgotten. I didn't know then how quickly that hope would unravel. The day the invitations started arriving, I didn't think much of it. A cousin posted a picture of hers online, the envelope all calligraphy and gold edges, and I smiled quietly to myself. I imagined mine would be in the mailbox soon. After all, I had spent 8 months of my life creating the centerpiece of the entire ceremony. Of course I would be there. Of course my name would be written on that elegant cardstock. The next morning, I checked the mailbox with anticipation. Bills, a flyer, a card for my neighbor, but nothing for me. I told myself it was fine. Maybe hers had been mailed separately, or maybe she wanted to give it to me in person. I tucked the thought away, forcing myself to be patient. Days passed. Each afternoon, I'd check the mail again, my heart catching when I saw the pile of envelopes, and each time, disappointment. Aunts and uncles began calling me, gushing about the invitation they had received, about the details, the location, the reception. My best friend, who had only met Madeline once, received hers and sent me a picture, asking if I was excited. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred. My name wasn't on the list. I tried to convince myself there had been a mistake. Maybe the invitation was lost in the mail. Maybe she had forgotten to stamp it. But deep down, I knew. When I stitched her dress, when I stayed awake until dawn sewing bead after bead, when I held my breath during every fitting, I believed I was also stitching myself into her story. But now the silence told me otherwise. One night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the finished dress, still draped carefully on the mannequin. My fingers traced the lace I had sewn by hand. 8 months of my life, every ounce of my effort, every piece of myself poured into a gown for a wedding I wasn't even invited to. The thought twisted in my chest until it felt hard to breathe. I didn't want to believe it, so I waited. Another day, another week. Still nothing. No envelope, no call, no acknowledgement that my presence was wanted. My phone stayed silent except for updates from relatives who assumed naturally that I would be there. They had no idea that behind my polite nods and vague responses, I was living with the truth. Madeline hadn't just forgotten. She had chosen to leave me out. The realization stung worse than any cruel word she had ever thrown at me. It wasn't carelessness, it was intentional. She wanted my work, my talent, my time. But she didn't want me. I wasn't part of her picture, not even in the back row of the church, not even as a guest. When I finally let myself admit it, the weight of betrayal pressed down harder than ever. I wasn't missing an invitation. I was being erased. The truth didn't come in a dramatic confession. It slipped out quietly, through the hushed tones of relatives who thought I wouldn't hear, through conversations not meant for me. One afternoon, while visiting my aunt, I overheard her on the phone. She thought I was in the other room, but I caught every word. Yes, Madeline said it herself. She didn't want Courtney at the wedding. Said she'd ruin the aesthetic. Too plain, she called her. Can you imagine? My heart thudded so loud I thought she might hear it. Ruin the aesthetic. Too plain. The words settled over me like ice, freezing me in place. I wanted to step into the room, to demand she repeat it, to confirm what I already knew. But I stayed frozen, listening, because part of me needed to hear it all. My aunt lowered her voice again. It's cruel, but you know how Madeline is. Everything has to be picture perfect. She only wants what looks good beside her. I felt my stomach drop, the weight of it heavier than the 8 months I had spent bent over fabric and thread. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a lost invitation or a mistake at the post office. It was deliberate. She had made the choice to use my hands, to take my work, to let me pour myself into her dream dress, and then cut me out of the dream entirely because I didn't fit her image. The betrayal burned in a way I can't explain. I thought of all those nights I had stayed up, pricking my fingers raw, convincing myself that maybe this dress would be my way back into her heart, my chance to finally be seen. I remembered her face in the mirror the day of the final fitting, her smile as she whispered, "It's perfect." For a brief moment, I thought we had bridged the distance between us. But behind that smile was the truth. She never saw me as part of the picture. She only saw the gown. Later that week, I confronted my mother. I didn't tell her what I had overheard. I simply asked why my invitation never arrived. She sighed, avoiding my eyes, and muttered, "Courtney, you know how particular your sister is. She just wants things a certain way. Don't take it so personally." That was all the confirmation I needed. Not only had Madeline excluded me, but my parents knew. They knew and chose silence. They chose to let me sow in the shadows, knowing I would never be allowed to stand in the light. That night, I sat on my bed with the scraps of fabric still left over from the gown. Pieces of lace, strands of thread, beads that had slipped from my hands. I turned them over in my palms, the physical proof of all I had given. And it hit me with a sharp, hollow ache. It wasn't just my work she had stolen. It was my hope. She had cut me out, not because I had failed her, but because I had never been enough in her eyes. The gown was perfect, but in her world, I was not. And that truth cut deeper than any needle ever could. I sat in my room with the dress standing tall on the mannequin, the fabric shimmering softly in the low light. It was beautiful, objectively beautiful. Every bead in its place, every seam lined perfectly, the lace flowing like water down the train. 8 months of my life stared back at me, but all I could feel was the weight of betrayal pressing against my chest. At first, I tried to fight the tears. I told myself not to give her that power, not to cry over someone who had chosen to erase me. But the harder I resisted, the more it built until the dam broke, and I found myself crumpled on the floor, sobbing into my hands. It wasn't just about the missing invitation anymore. It was the realization that every stitch I had sewn carried a lie. I had believed I was stitching us closer together, that this gown was proof we were still sisters beneath all the favoritism and dismissal. But the truth was sharper than any needle. I hadn't been making a dress for love. I had been making it for someone who saw me as useful, not loved. I thought back to every fitting, every time Madeline had smiled into the mirror. She never once looked at me with gratitude. She looked at the gown. She looked at her reflection. I had been invisible even then, a pair of hands moving in the background. And I was foolish enough to think that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The silence of my room was unbearable. No laughter, no voices, just the echo of my own heartache. I stared at the gown and realized it had become a monument, not to my skill, but to the way I had been used. My parents knew and said nothing. My sister smiled at me while plotting to leave me out. And me? I was left holding the scraps, literally and figuratively. I touched the hem of the dress, my fingers trembling. I remembered the nights I had fallen asleep at the sewing machine, the mornings I dragged myself to work with bleary eyes, the meals I skipped to afford fabric. I had poured all of myself into this gown, hoping it meant something beyond thread and cloth. But in Madeline's world, it never meant love. It meant convenience. It meant free labor. It meant she could shine a little brighter while I stayed in the shadows. The more I sat there, the more the hurt transformed into something heavier. It wasn't just sadness. It was clarity. She didn't care about me. Not my parents, not my sister. They cared about the image, the photos, the illusion of perfection. And in their illusion, there was never space for me. The dress stood gleaming, but I had never felt uglier, smaller, or more unseen. In that moment, I realized the cruelest cut wasn't Madeline's words or her decision to exclude me. It was the truth staring back at me. She had never wanted me in the picture at all. The tears eventually dried, leaving behind an emptiness I couldn't quite name. I sat staring at the dress for what felt like hours, the silence stretching around me. My whole life, I had been taught to chase their approval, to bend myself into shapes that might finally earn me a seat at their table. Every effort, every gesture, every accomplishment had been about proving I was worthy. And now, with the gown finished and no invitation in my hand, the truth pressed down hard and undeniable. No matter what I gave, they were never going to see me. At first, that thought crushed me. But then, slowly, it lit a spark. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had never dared to. Why am I still fighting for their love when they have made it clear they don't want to give it? The question stung, but it also gave me something I hadn't felt before. Permission. Permission to stop begging. Permission to stop measuring my worth against their impossible standards. Permission to walk away. I stood up and walked to the mirror. My reflection was tired, my eyes still swollen from crying, but I saw someone stronger than I had realized. I had created something breathtaking with my own 2 hands. That dress didn't erase me, it proved me. It was evidence of my talent, my discipline, my patience. Whether Madeline wore it or not, whether my family ever spoke my name with pride, I had built something extraordinary. And maybe that was enough. That night, I cleared the sewing table. I put away the scraps of fabric and stacked my sketchbooks neatly. Not because I was giving up, but because I was choosing to use my craft for myself, not for people who only saw me as a tool. My sewing didn't have to be about earning love anymore. It could be about creating, about expressing, about proving to myself what I was capable of. Over the following days, I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I stopped checking the mailbox with false hope. Instead, I started sketching again. Not for Madeline, not for the family, but for me. Bold designs that scared me, that challenged me, that I would never have dared to attempt before. I reached out to friends who had encouraged me, and they responded with warmth that reminded me what real support feels like. For the first time, I realized I didn't need to sit at their table. I could build my own. A table where laughter wasn't at my expense, where love wasn't conditional, where I didn't have to compete with someone else's reflection. The shift was subtle but powerful. My worth didn't hinge on an invitation or a smirk or a cruel word disguised as family tradition. They had erased me from their story. But I didn't need to write myself back into theirs. I could write my own. And this time, I wouldn't be asking for a place. I'd be creating one that was mine alone. It started small, almost by accident. One evening, I took a photo of the wedding gown on the mannequin, the lace glistening under the soft glow of my lamp. I hesitated before posting it online. My finger hovered over the screen, my chest tightening with doubt. Would anyone care? Would they dismiss it as Courtney's little hobby, the way my family always had? But something inside me whispered, "This is yours. Share it." So I did. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few polite likes from friends, a passing comment about how pretty it looked. Instead, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages began trickling in, first from acquaintances I barely spoke to. "Did you really make this yourself? This looks like something from a designer boutique." By the next morning, the trickle had turned into a stream. Strangers shared my post. Small accounts tagged me with words like talent and artistry. For the first time, people weren't just looking at the dress, they were seeing me. I started posting more. Sketches that had gathered dust in my notebooks. Photos of old projects I had stitched quietly in my bedroom. I showed the process, pins scattered on the table, fabric draped over chairs, beads cupped in my palm. Slowly, my little corner of the internet grew into a stage I hadn't realized I needed. Then came the messages that changed everything. Women asking if I could design something for them. A bridesmaid's dress. A prom gown. One woman wrote, "I can't afford luxury brands, but I've never seen anything this beautiful. Could you make something special just for me?" Reading her words, I felt tears prick my eyes. She saw value in me, in my craft, in what I had to offer, something my own family had refused to do. At first, I worried I couldn't manage it. I was just one person with a sewing machine, still nursing the sting of betrayal. But as I began taking on small projects, I found joy I hadn't felt in years. Each new dress wasn't just fabric, it was healing. It was proof that I wasn't invisible, that my work and my worth could stand on their own. Soon, opportunities I had only dreamed of began to appear. A local boutique reached out about carrying my designs. A bridal magazine asked to feature photos of my work. My inbox filled with names of people who didn't know my family, didn't care about Madeline's spotlight, but who believed in me. Every message, every order, every compliment stitched me back together in a way no apology from my family ever could. One night, as I packed up a finished gown to ship to a client, I paused to look at the mannequin standing bare in the corner. It was the same mannequin that had once held Madeline's wedding dress. But now, instead of symbolizing betrayal, it represented a new beginning. Madeline thought she'd cut me out, but her cruelty had given me something she never expected, a stage of my own. And on that stage, for the first time, I wasn't the plain sister. I was the designer, the creator, the one finally seen. The day of the wedding arrived, and for the first time in months, I woke up without a pit in my stomach. I knew what the date meant. I could picture the flowers, the aisle, the camera flashes capturing Madeline in the gown I had created. But instead of sitting alone, waiting for updates to sting me, I made a choice. I wouldn't mourn the seat I was never offered. I would live. So I brewed coffee, put on music, and pulled fabric across my table. My tiny apartment was buzzing with laughter as two of my closest friends lounged on the couch, cheering me on as I sketched a new design. They had brought pastries, balloons, and a ridiculous crown from the dollar store, insisting we celebrate Courtney Day. It was silly, but it made me laugh. The kind of laughter that fills your chest instead of hollowing it. I worked while they chatted around me, the rhythm of the sewing machine mixing with their voices. Every stitch felt different now. I wasn't sewing for scraps of approval or to earn a place at someone else's table. I was sewing because I loved it, because I was good at it, because it was mine. Every so often, my phone buzzed with notifications. Social media posts of Madeline's big day started to appear. Her smiling in the gown, her husband beaming at her side. The comments poured in. What a gorgeous dress. She looks like a queen. Not a single mention of me, not a whisper of the hands that had made it. And for once, it didn't cut the way I thought it would. Because while her pictures were racking up likes, my inbox was filling with something better. Orders, real opportunities. People who saw my work and wanted to wear it proudly. At some point in the afternoon, one of my friends asked softly, "Do you regret it?" Making the dress, I paused, pressing my hands against the fabric in front of me. For a long time, I had thought I would regret every second of those 8 months. But in that moment, I shook my head. "No," I said, "I don't regret it. Because if she hadn't shut me out, I wouldn't have stepped into this. I wouldn't be here, building something of my own." As the evening settled in, I put down my needle and sat back, looking at the dress taking shape on the mannequin. It wasn't a wedding gown this time. It was something entirely mine, bold and unapologetic, and it felt like freedom. I didn't need to be at her wedding to know my worth. I didn't need their photos or their approval to validate me. What I needed was right here. Friends who supported me. A craft that gave me purpose. And a future I was building stitch by stitch. Final reflection. I spent 8 months sewing her dress. She didn't give me an invitation. But in shutting me out, she pushed me into a future more beautiful than she'll ever know.